this is Emily Leiphart here for Tailored Expressions, and in today's video I'm featuring several products from the Grad release. Products I'll be using include the Shout Out You Did It Layering Stencil, Shout Out You Did It Die, the Class of 2022 Mini Stamp Set, and the Little Bits Grad Cap Die. The Shout Out You Did It Layering Stencil is a set of 2 stencils which allows you to create a full card front sentiment similar to the stamp from last month's Celebrate You card making kit. The first stencil allows you to customize the colors of the letters, and the second stencil adds a shadow for a 3D effect. For additional layering options, the Shout Out You Did It die is the same size as the first stencil. I just love this big die, and I'll be using it on its own in 2 different ways for different looks. I also have the Class of 2022 Mini Stamp Set, which allows you to add your choice of wording around the big stenciled or die-cut sentiment. The Little Bits Grad Cap die is great because it allows you to add the tassel on the left or the right, and I love that option. As you can see, the main colors of my cards will be watermelon, lemon meringue, blue raspberry, and plum punch. To start, I'll be creating a few emojis using the Build an Emoji, Gathered Stars, and the Little Bits Grad Cap dies. The Build an Emoji die set doesn't have stars, and I want to use stars in the place of the eyes. Obviously, I wanted to make these graduation emojis, and the new Grad Cap die fits perfectly on the face in the emoji set. I used liquid glue to adhere everything except the stars. To create the panels for the first 2 cards, I cut a sheet of 8.5 by 11 sugar cube cardstock in half, and die cut the You Did It die in the center. Let me explain the reason for this. On one of the panels, I centered the You Did It die. On the second panel, I placed it on an angle. I did this knowing that I wanted the die to be on an angle within the rectangle, but I didn't necessarily know where I wanted it within the rectangle. Doing this on a larger piece of cardstock allows me to decide later, especially when I add the other elements like the graduate emoji. For example, if I replace the letter O with the graduate emoji, then I need more space at the top of the panel, so I placed the stitched rectangle accordingly. For the angled card, there were several placement options for the graduate emoji, but once I decided it was going on the bottom left, then I shifted the rectangle accordingly. Had I cut A2 panels before die cutting, I wouldn't have necessarily known where to place the stitched rectangle stacklet. I rarely create with a plan, so this made it easier to customize the panels after the fact. For the background of my first card, I used the Easy Strips 1/4 inch die to cut strips of watermelon, lemon meringue, blue raspberry, and plum punch cardstock. I glued them in a repeating pattern on an angle on the card base. Knowing that the emoji was sitting at the top, I didn't use any lemon meringue strips until I reached the center of the card. I left 2 of the corners white for visual interest, and after trimming off the overhanging pieces, I popped on the panel an emoji with foam tape. I added gold stars in 3 sizes, all cut from the Gathered Stars die to balance out the weight of the emoji. The way I created the background for my second card is a bit unconventional. If the sentiment was straight, I could have used a coordinating stencil, but since it was too difficult to line it up, I did it this way. I cut a second panel using the same stitched rectangle stacklet. Then I basically just eyeballed the placement of each word and placed 2 post-it notes so I would know where to ink blend each line. I played around using solid cardstock from sea salt to Oreo, but it was just too stark and boring, so that's why I decided to ink blend a gradient using sea salt, Earl Grey, and poppy seed inks. I'm not sure why I used my black blender brush here, but I meant to use the gray brush. You can see me using all 3 grays for each line or word of the sentiment. I always hold the top panel over the ink blending to see how it looks and add more ink if it's too light. I added darker grays to the top edge of each word. After I decide on blue raspberry for the card base, I prepare to stamp the sentiment from Class of 2022 on both layers of the card front. I have both pieces here so I can double stamp the sentiment, once on the top layer and again on the ink blended layer. I'm using VersaFine Onyx Black pigment ink for this technique. I make sure the stamp is centered across the U, then I prep the stamp by rubbing it with my palm. I stamp the top panel first, then remove that, and stamp again on the ink blended panel. When I stack the layers again, it looks as if the sentiment was stamped once, but the lines aren't broken up and it looks continuous. Before assembling the card, I used the diamond piercing plate on the front. I glued the 2 layers flat, then used a tape runner to attach it to the card base. I positioned the emoji with foam tape. I did want to add some embellishments to the top of the card, but at this point in my creative process, I wasn't sure what I wanted to do, so I left it and I'll return to that later. My third and final card will feature the You Did It layering stencils, and I'll be repeating the 4 featured colors. This time I'm using the Bitty blender brushes. I start with watermelon ink, then move to lemon meringue, blue raspberry, and finish with plum punch. When the first stencil layer is finished, I switch to the second stencil and use poppy seed ink to create the shadow. I made sure to wipe off the stencil in between colors. It does look like it could get messy, and you could definitely use masking paper or post-it notes between each letter if you wanted to make sure the colors didn't blend into each other, but I wasn't too concerned about that. If you look at the finished card, you'll see that the transitions make it look like watercoloring, which is really cool. For this card, I created a frame using the Frame Frame 2 die, which I cut twice from gold glitter cardstock and Oreo cardstock. I glued the 2 layers together, mimicking the shadow of the layering stencil so that the black edge shows toward the bottom right. Now I'm going to stamp and heat emboss the mini strips Grad stamp on Oreo cardstock and add these to the stenciled sentiment. I used the amazing anti-static powder tool before inking up the stamp with watermark ink and applying gold embossing powder. After heat setting and die cutting, I used black foam strips to attach both the frame and the sentiment strips to the panel. This card not only works as a graduation card, it also works as a retirement card. Both the shutout layering stencil and die can be used for graduation, retirement, and general congratulations and other milestones. I'm even imagining some fun, snarky ones for my friends. Going back to my second card, I used the Gathered Stars die again to create stars in watermelon, lemon meringue, blue raspberry, and plum punch. I used both glue dots and liquid glue to attach them to the panel, mostly to create 3 different clusters, the emoji being one of them, and balance out the card. I hope you enjoyed all the ideas presented in this video on how to use these new Grad products, and I look forward to seeing all your projects. You can find all of these products in the Tailored Expressions web store at tailoredexpressions.com. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you again soon.